Why did no one look her in the eye? That was the first thing she noticed when she stepped into the briefing room. The silence, the shuffle of boots against concrete, the maps spread out under dim light. The men around the table spoke in clipped sentences, mission codes rolling off their tongues, but not one of them dared meet her gaze. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was doubt. Maybe it was something else entirely. She sat quietly, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. Her voice wasn't loud, but her presence lingered like an echo in the room, steady, unshaken, impossible to ignore even when no one spoke her name. She didn't need to demand attention. She carried it with her. The kind you earn through nights spent awake under mortar fire, through missions where hesitation meant death, through losses that still clawed at her ribs even years later. But tonight was different. On the table lay a map marked with red pins, coordinates deep in a valley that swallowed sound, a place locals whispered about. Intelligence said there was a convoy moving in, weapons hidden under tarps, guarded by men who'd kill at the first flicker of movement. The mission was simple on paper: stop it. In reality, nothing about it was simple. She glanced at the photographs stapled to the file, blurred faces, satellite captures, names scribbled in margins, but she wasn't looking at the targets. She was looking past them, searching for something that wasn't there. She caught herself tapping her finger against the folder, a small, restless beat, a habit she tried to hide, but one man noticed. Sergeant Cole, sitting across from her, his face hardened by years of sand and blood. He tilted his head, curious. He knew her longer than most, knew she wasn't tapping because she was bored. She was calculating. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, rattling the thin glass. She could hear it even through the hum of the projector. A storm was building. The commander's voice cut through the silence. "We leave at 400, questions." No one spoke. Her throat tightened. She had won, but asking it would mean revealing the reason she hadn't slept for 3 nights straight. The reason this mission cut deeper than the rest. She swallowed it down, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, then closing. Instead, she nodded once, precise, controlled. Later in the barracks, the silence pressed heavier. The others joked quietly, their laughter bouncing off metal bunks, masking the weight of what lay ahead. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, tracing the rivets with her eyes. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but her mind ran wild. She thought of her father, not his face in the present, but the faded memory of his voice, calm, reassuring, the way he spoke about duty when she was just a child. "Courage isn't about shouting," he had told her once. "It's about standing when no one else will." He never came back from his last deployment. They called it a casualty. She called it a theft. And now, years later, she was here, on the edge of the same kind of mission. Different valley, same shadows, and she couldn't help but feel she was walking into the echo of his final steps. Her chest tightened. She rolled over, clutching her dog tags, cold metal, sharp against her skin. She whispered something no one could hear, a vow she made not to the flag, not to the uniform, but to herself. By 400, the air was cold enough to bite. The team loaded into the convoy, engines rumbling low, headlights slicing through the dark. She climbed in, her rifle resting across her knees. The metal vibrated with the road beneath. Her gloved fingers traced the scratches on the stock, each one a memory she didn't want but couldn't erase. Beside her, Private Ramirez adjusted his helmet. Young, too young. He tried to hide the tremor in his hands, pretending to tighten straps that were already tight. She noticed. She leaned slightly closer. "You'll be fine," she said softly. His eyes darted to hers, surprised. She rarely spoke before missions. Her words landed heavier because of it. He nodded quickly, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. The convoy stopped 2 kilometers out. From there, it was boots on dirt. The valley stretched ahead, silent, shadows swallowing light. The air smelled of dust and pine, thick with the kind of stillness that made every breath feel too loud. They moved in formation, slow, deliberate. Every crunch of gravel under their boots sounded like an alarm. She scanned the ridges through her scope, eyes sharp, breath measured. Nothing, just the faint rustle of wind in the trees. But her gut told her otherwise. Halfway down the slope, Sergeant Cole raised his fist. The team froze. Ahead, faint headlights flickered. The convoy, trucks crawling through the valley like predators. Her pulse steadied. She sank to one knee, rifle against her shoulder, cheek pressed to the stock. Through her scope she saw them, the men guarding the trucks, weapons slung, eyes scanning the darkness, unaware of the hunters in the shadows. She exhaled, slow, controlled. And then, the radio crackled, a whisper too faint, broken by static, but she heard enough. A voice, foreign, sharp, not theirs. The enemy had scanners too. They knew. The valley erupted in gunfire. She hit the dirt, her heart hammering against her ribs, ears ringing with the snap of bullets cutting the air. Gravel bit into her palms. She crawled behind a rock, pressing herself flat. The world narrowed to flashes of muzzle fire and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. Her finger hovered near the trigger, but her mind raced elsewhere. Not to fear, not to the danger around her, but to that whisper in the barracks, the vow she made in silence. She couldn't break it now. Her eye found the scope again. Breath in, breath out. And when her fingers squeezed, the rifle's crack cut through the chaos like thunder. One target dropped, another scrambled. Ramirez shouted, his voice cracking. She turned, saw him pinned, bullets sparking against the dirt inches from his head. He was frozen. Her body moved before thought. She broke cover, sprinting low, dirt spraying under her boots. The world slowed, gunfire muffled, shouts distant. She reached him, shoved him down, her body covering his as rounds tore overhead. "Move," she hissed, grabbing his vest, dragging him behind a ridge. His breath came in gasps, panic flooding his face. She locked eyes with him, fierce, unblinking. "You're still here," she said. "That means you fight." Something shifted in him, a spark. Not courage, not yet, but something close. Around them the battle raged. The valley swallowed the sound of screams and gunfire, amplifying it into something unbearable. But through it all her presence cut steady, a heartbeat in the storm. And though her voice wasn't loud, though her words were few, the echo of her courage carried further than any shout. What did it feel like to run into gunfire when every instinct told you to stay hidden? For her, it wasn't bravery, it wasn't recklessness. It was necessity, a decision made in the fraction of a second when hesitation meant watching someone die. She never saw herself as a savior. She saw herself as a shield. But the moment she dragged Ramirez behind cover, when his terrified eyes locked onto hers, she realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She couldn't bear to lose anyone else. The gunfire still echoed through the valley, harsh bursts bouncing off the rocky walls. Muzzle flashes lit the dark like broken lightning. Dust stung her throat as she pressed her back against the ridge. Her ears rang, drowning out the radio chatter. "Status," Sergeant Cole's voice barked through the comms, cutting through the haze. She squeezed her radio. "Two up," she answered, her tone sharp, clipped. "Pinned South Ridge." She peeked over the rocks, her scope cutting through shadows. Shapes moved along the convoy. One truck was already turning, its headlights sweeping across the valley floor. Retreating, but not empty. She could see silhouettes scrambling into the back. Crates, weapons, too much to lose. Cole's reply came ragged, half drowned by static. "We hold. Stop that convoy." The order was simple. The execution was. She shifted, pulling Ramirez closer. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, sweat streaking down his temple despite the cold. His hands fumbled with his rifle, nerves shaking through his bones. "Focus," she told him, her voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos. "Breathe with me." He tried. His breaths caught uneven but gradually slowed, syncing with hers. She could almost see the fear unclench its grip on him, if only slightly. "You cover left, I'll cover right," she said. "Don't think, just follow." He nodded, swallowing hard. And then, without warning, she broke from cover. Bullets tore the dirt around her boots. She moved low, fast, her rifle pressed to her shoulder. Every sound sharpened, the hollow echo of boots on gravel, the whistle of a round skimming too close, the grunt of a man shouting orders in a language she recognized but didn't speak. She dropped, aimed, fired. One guard crumpled near the truck. Another spun, returning fire, his round sparking against stone. She rolled, exhaled, and fired again. Silence followed, a silence louder than the chaos before. The convoy roared, engines grinding, tires spitting gravel as the trucks pushed forward. Her gut twisted. They couldn't let them through. Cole's voice thundered in her ear. Cut them off at the pass. But she was too far south, too late to intercept, unless... She glanced back at Ramirez, who was crouched low, rifle trembling in his grip. Young, scared, but alive, and waiting for her lead. "Ramirez," she called. He looked up, startled. She gestured toward a ridge that cut across the valley. High ground, dangerous to reach, but their only chance. "You climb," she said. "Set up, stop those trucks." His eyes widened. "Alone." "You won't be alone," she answered. "I'll cover you." For a second he didn't move. His fear was an anchor. But then he caught the weight in her gaze, the kind that wasn't asking, wasn't pleading. It was demanding because she believed he could. And something inside him cracked. He nodded once, jaw tight, and sprinted toward the ridge. She turned, pivoted, fired, covering his ascent, dropping enemies who turned their barrels toward him. Her shots were precise, cold, efficient. Each trigger squeeze was another second earned for Ramirez's climb. By the time he reached the ridge, the convoy was almost through. Engines roared louder. The trucks rattled over uneven ground. He dropped to his stomach, rifle aimed, breath sharp through the comms. "I can't," he started, panic creeping back. "Yes, you can," she interrupted. "Steady, just like before with me." Her own breath slowed, deliberate, measured. She exaggerated it into the comms, letting him sink again. She could almost feel his hands steadying on the rifle. And then the crack of his shot. One tire burst. Sparks flew as the truck swerved, screeching to a halt. Men shouted, scrambling. Another shot, the windshield spiderwebbed, the driver slumping forward. Her lips pressed together, a small, fleeting relief. He did it. But the fight wasn't over. Gunfire erupted again, harder, closer. She ducked as rounds chewed through stone inches above her head. Dirt sprayed her cheek, stinging her skin. She pressed flat, heart pounding. Her mind flickered not to fear but to memory. A hospital room. A letter folded in her hand. The day she swore she'd never let silence take what mattered again. The vow burned in her chest. She pushed up, swung her rifle around, and fired through the dark. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but her focus was razor sharp. Two men dropped near the disabled truck. Another ducked, retreating. Convoy stalled. Cole's voice crackled, rough but triumphant. But she didn't celebrate. Not yet. Her instincts whispered something else, danger still lingering unseen. She scanned the shadows, her scope cutting across the ridges. And then she saw it. A flicker of movement where there shouldn't have been any. Too far for Ramirez to cover. Too close for the rest of the team. A flank. Her pulse thudded. She clicked her radio. Cole left ridge incoming. But even as she called it, she knew they wouldn't get there in time. So she moved. She sprinted from cover, legs burning, lungs searing with cold air. Every step was a defiance of the bullets snapping at her heels. She dove into a shallow trench just as a burst of automatic fire tore through the air where she'd been seconds before. Her chest heaved, dust filled her throat, but her hands stayed steady. She lifted her rifle, aimed through the narrow gap, and squeezed. The figure on the ridge dropped, his weapon clattering against stone. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. Her breath came ragged, her cheek pressed to the dirt. The world slowed. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, loud and unrelenting. Then Cole's voice came, softer this time. Clear, all clear. For a moment, no one moved. The valley felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see if death had truly passed. And then the radio filled with laughter, ragged, exhausted, half disbelieving. Relief spilled out, messy and raw. She pushed herself up slowly, her limbs trembling under the weight of adrenaline. Ramirez slid down from the ridge, face streaked with sweat and dust, eyes wide with something between shock and pride. He stumbled toward her, rifle loose in his hand. "I thought," he started, his voice breaking. She stopped him with a small shake of her head. "You didn't think," she corrected. "You acted." He blinked, then nodded, swallowing hard. Cole approached, his steps heavy, his face unreadable in the dim light. He studied her for a long moment, not with the doubt she had felt in the briefing room, not with pity, but with something closer to recognition. "You saved us out there," he said simply. Her eyes flickered, searching his face. She didn't answer, didn't need to. Words felt too fragile against the truth of what had just unfolded. Instead, she looked out across the valley, where smoke curled from the disabled trucks, where silence had replaced chaos. She knew better than to mistake survival for victory. But for tonight, survival was enough. The team began gathering, securing the area, voices low, movement slow with fatigue. Ramirez sat heavily on a rock, his hands still trembling, his breaths uneven. But in his eyes she saw it, the spark of someone who had glimpsed their own strength for the first time. And in that moment she felt it too, a reminder of why she stayed, why she fought, not for glory, not for recognition, but for the lives that could still be pulled back from the edge. The night grew colder. The stars hung distant, indifferent. The valley was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet it had been before. This quiet was earned, paid for in sweat and blood. She slung her rifle over her shoulder, her body aching, her mind heavy. And as she walked toward the wreckage, her fingers brushed the dog tags around her neck. Her voice wasn't loud, it never had been. But her presence here, now, echoed across the battlefield like living courage. And though no one said it out loud, every man in that valley felt it. Every single one. Why is silence sometimes heavier than gunfire? That question haunted her as dawn broke over the valley. The trucks still smoldered where they'd been disabled. Acrid smoke coiled into the pale sky, carrying with it the bitter stench of fuel and burnt rubber. The ground was scarred with bullet marks, blood darkening the dust in uneven patches. And yet the quiet now was suffocating, the kind that pressed down on the chest and refused to let go. She stood at the edge of the wreckage, her rifle slung, her gloves blackened. The others moved around her, gathering weapons, radioing in updates, dragging the dead into rows. But she hardly noticed them. Her eyes lingered on the horizon, on the jagged teeth of the mountains cutting into the rising sun. It should have felt like victory. They had stopped the convoy, prevented weapons from slipping through the cracks of war. But victory was a word she didn't trust anymore. It always came laced with loss. Her gaze dropped to the bodies laid out in silence. Some were theirs, some were not. Each one carried a story that ended here in the dust. She wondered if somewhere, in some distant village, in some nameless city, someone would wake up today, not yet knowing the absence waiting for them. Her throat tightened, she turned away. Nearby, Ramirez sat slumped against a rock, helmet off, his dark hair matted with sweat. He stared at the ground, rifle resting across his knees. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight as though speaking would break him. She walked over, her boots crunching softly in the dirt. He looked up, startled, then quickly looked away again. "You did well," she said, her tone steady, matter of fact. He shook his head. "I almost froze." "You didn't," she corrected. His eyes flicked to her. "Only because you were there." She didn't answer. She didn't want him tethering his survival to her shadow. He needed to believe it came from him, not from her presence. But how could she say that without breaking the fragile thread that held him together? Instead, she crouched, lowering herself to his level. Listen, fear doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away just because you fire a weapon. It stays with you. The question is, what do you do with it? He swallowed hard, his eyes wet with something he was fighting to hide. What if next time I can't move? Then you breathe, she said softly, one breath, then another, until the only thing left to do is act. He nodded, his jaw trembling. She reached out, briefly squeezing his shoulder, not as an officer to a subordinate, but as one human to another. Then she stood, leaving him space. Cole approached, his boots heavy, his face drawn. He stopped beside her, squinting at the wreckage. HQ wants us to hold position until pickup. They'll send a transport in 6 hours. She nodded. His eyes shifted to her. You okay? The question caught her off guard. He rarely asked. His voice carried no softness, but the weight beneath it was real. She hesitated. The automatic response sat ready, I'm fine, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, I will be. He studied her, as though weighing whether to press further. Then he gave a single nod and walked away. She exhaled slowly, watching him go. Hours passed in a haze of exhaustion. The sun climbed higher, baking the valley, pressing heat into their armor until every breath felt heavy. The team rotated watch, some catching restless sleep under the shade of rocks, others sitting in silence, rifles across their laps. She found herself wandering to the edge of the ridge, where the view stretched endless. Wind tugged at her hair, carried whispers through the canyon. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, half expecting to hear another voice, one that no longer existed. Her father's. It had been over a decade since his last letter arrived. She could still see the ink smudged where his hand had pressed too hard, the way he wrote her name as if it carried all the weight he had left. He had told her to be strong, to live with dignity, to never let silence swallow truth. And yet here she was, living in silence, speaking only when necessary, carrying the weight of a vow she had never confessed to anyone. She opened her eyes, the mountains staring back at her, indifferent. Behind her, 2 soldiers spoke quietly, their voices drifting. You ever think about home? One asked. Every damn day, the other replied, his tone brittle. But I don't know what I'd even do if I went back. Feels like the war would follow me anyway. A pause, then softer. My daughter's 5 now. Last time I saw her, she was learning her first words. His voice cracked. I missed all the ones that came after. Silence stretched. Then the first man muttered, You'll get back, you will. But the weight in his tone betrayed his doubt. She listened without turning, her chest tightening. Their words weren't meant for her, but they struck deep. She thought of all the moments stolen, not just theirs, but hers. The birthdays missed, the voices unheard, the years she traded away for a uniform and a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The sun dipped lower as hours dragged on. Shadows stretched long, painting the valley in muted gold. When the transport finally arrived, its rotors thundering, dust spiraling into the air, the team moved with sluggish relief. They boarded, one by one, the aircraft rattling as it lifted from the valley floor. She sat near the edge, the wind whipping her face through the open side door. The valley shrank beneath them, smoke curling like a fatting memory. She should have felt lighter, leaving the battlefield behind. Instead, the weight followed her, heavier than before. Back at base, the debrief was clinical. Numbers, coordinates, enemy estimates, success rates. The language of war reduced to statistics, stripping flesh from bone. She sat quietly, hands folded, listening. When asked for her input, she spoke plainly, her voice steady, her details precise. No one questioned her. But no one asked how she felt either. Later in the barracks, the others settled into routine, some sleeping, some writing letters, some staring blankly at walls as though answers might appear there. She sat on her cot, her boots still dusty, her rifle propped beside her. She pulled a small notebook from her pack, its cover worn, its pages filled with uneven handwriting. Her father's. She traced the faded ink with her finger, her chest aching. She read the same lines she had read 100 times before, words about courage, about silence, about living for something greater than yourself. But one line always cut the deepest. If I don't come back, promise me you'll live with purpose. Her eyes burned. She shut the notebook quickly, pressing it to her chest as though holding it closer might make the ache lessen. Across the room, Ramirez watched her quietly, his face thoughtful. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. He had seen enough in her silence to understand that courage didn't always look like shouting orders or charging headlong. Sometimes it looked like a woman sitting alone with a notebook, fighting battles no one else could see. She lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the valley, the gunfire, the faces of those they lost. The vow pressed heavy against her ribs, unspoken but relentless. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another fight, another silence to carry. But tonight, as the barracks dimmed and the hum of night settled in, she whispered softly into the dark. I'm still here. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The presence of her voice, steady, fragile, unbroken, was enough to echo, if only to herself. Why did she volunteer before anyone else spoke? That question echoed in the room the next evening, when the commander laid the new map across the table. The others exchanged uncertain glances, fatigue written into their faces. They had barely recovered from the valley. Dust still clung to their boots, bruises still bloomed beneath their armor. But the war didn't pause for healing. The mission was simple on paper again, too simple. Intercept a signal traced to an abandoned village deep in the mountains. Intelligence suggested it was being used as a relay hub, but the phrasing, suggested, unsettled her. Suggestions got people killed. The commander asked for volunteers. Silence followed. No one wanted to be the first. And then, without hesitation, her hand lifted. She felt every eye shift to her, but she didn't waver. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. I'll go. Cole's brow furrowed, a flicker of irritation in his gaze. Ramirez looked at her like he was waiting for an explanation. None came. The commander nodded briskly, writing her name down before moving on. But the truth was, she had known about that village long before the briefing. It had appeared in her father's letters, not as a mission site but as a place he described once, almost in passing. He had written about the way the mountains around it swallowed sound, how the air there seemed older than the war itself. His words carried a strange reverence, as though he had seen something there worth remembering. And when the coordinates flashed on the map tonight, her chest had tightened. She couldn't explain it, not to them, not yet. After the briefing, the team dispersed. Cole caught up with her in the corridor, his boots heavy against the concrete. What was that? He demanded. She kept walking, her pace steady. A mission. You volunteered too fast. His voice dropped lower, rough with suspicion. You know something. She paused just enough to meet his eyes. His stare was sharp, probing. He had known her long enough to sense when she was holding something back. But she didn't break. I know it needs to be done, she said simply. Cole's jaw flexed, but he didn't push further. He just shook his head, muttering, one day your silence is going to get you killed. She turned away, but his words lingered. That night sleep refused her again. She lay awake, the barracks heavy with the sound of men breathing, shifting in their bunks. The notebook rested on her chest, its pages worn, its corners bent. She traced her father's handwriting in the dark, her thumb brushing over one particular line. If you ever find yourself where I once stood, remember why you chose this life. Her breath caught. Was this the place he meant? That village hidden in the mountains? Or was she only reaching, desperate to stitch his ghost into her present? The question haunted her until dawn. By the time the convoy rolled out, She felt the familiar heaviness in her bones, the kind that came not just from exhaustion, but from carrying too many unspoken truths. Ramirez sat across from her in the transport, helmet resting on his knee. He kept glancing at her, his expression torn between worry and curiosity. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. Her eyes lifted to his. He swallowed. "I mean, I get it, you're strong, you don't need anyone, but—" His voice faltered. "I don't know, I guess I'm saying you saved me out there. If there's something going on with you, you don't have to carry it by yourself." The words were raw, unpolished. They caught her off guard. For a moment she almost told him. Almost. The truth pressed at the edges of her throat, about her father, about the letters, about why this mission clawed at her more than the others. But instead she just said, "Focus on your breathing. That's how you'll survive today." He looked down, nodding slowly, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. The convoy wound through jagged roads, the mountains towering higher with every turn. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at exposed skin. Snow clung stubbornly to shaded cliffs, even in late season. When they finally stopped, the village lay ahead, crumbling stone walls, rooftops caved in, windows gaping like hollow eyes. The silence here was deeper than the valley had been. No birds, no wind, just stillness heavy and unnatural. Cole raised his fist, signaling halt. The team spread out, boots crunching softly on gravel, weapons up, eyes scanning every shadow. She stepped carefully, her fingers grazing the worn stone of a half-collapsed wall. The texture was rough, cold. She tried to picture her father standing here years ago, writing about this place in a letter that never explained why it mattered. Her stomach tightened. "Clear left," a soldier called. "Clear right," another echoed. But she didn't trust the quiet, not here. They moved deeper, past doorways that led into darkness, past stairwells that crumbled beneath their weight. The smell of damp stone and old ash lingered, as though the village itself remembered fire. Ramirez's voice crackled through comms. "Ma'am, signals coming from the far end, stronger now." She nodded, motioning him forward. They reached the remains of what looked like a school, walls still standing, roof half gone, chalkboards cracked and faded with ghostly equations. The signal pulsed strongest here. Cole and two others swept inside, their beams cutting across dust and debris. She stayed near the doorway, her rifle steady, her breath controlled. And then a sound, soft, barely audible. Not static, not machinery, a voice. She froze, straining to catch it, her pulse quickened. It was a child. Her grip tightened on the rifle. That couldn't be right. This village was abandoned, empty, that's what they were told. But the voice came again, faint, broken, like a lullaby half remembered. "Cole," she whispered into comms, "you hear that?" Static, then his reply rough, negative. She swallowed. Was it in her head, memory tangled with present, or was someone truly here, hidden in the ruins? Her chest constricted. She stepped deeper into the shadows, following the fragile thread of sound. Each step echoed louder in the silence, until she reached a corner of the school where the wall had collapsed inward, forming a jagged shelter. And there, eyes, wide, frightened, reflecting the faint beam of her flashlight. A girl no older than 8. Her throat went dry. "Clear," Cole's voice barked from across the room. She didn't answer right away. She crouched slowly, lowering her rifle, her hands trembling. The girl pressed back against the stone, clutching something, a worn piece of cloth, faded with age. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence for the first time. "I won't hurt you." The girl's eyes darted, wild, mistrustful. And in that moment, the soldier's vow collided with the daughter's memory. Her father's letters, his reverence for this place, the way he wrote about voices that lingered even when the world moved on. This was why she was here, not just to intercept a signal, not just to follow orders, but because somewhere, deep down, she knew this place still carried a piece of what he had left behind. The girl whispered something too soft to catch. Her chest tightened. She leaned closer, her hand shaking slightly as she reached out. But before she could speak again, a sharp crack split the air outside. A rifle, not theirs. The illusion of stillness shattered. Cole's voice roared through comms. Contact. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the hollow village. The girl flinched, curling tighter into the rubble. Dust rained from the ceiling as rounds struck nearby walls. She turned, heart slamming in her chest. The mission was no longer about signals, no longer about orders. Now it was about keeping this child alive. The crack of the first shot still rang in her ears when the village erupted. Bullets tore into stone, sending shards flying. Dust and debris filled the air, turning every beam of light into a fractured blur. The silence of the abandoned village shattered into chaos. She lunged sideways, her shoulders slamming against the wall as she shielded the girl with her body. The child whimpered, clutching her tattered cloth tighter, her wide eyes squeezed shut. Cole, she barked into comms. Contact east side. His voice roared back, ragged with urgency. Multiple hostiles, at least a squad. Ramirez's voice crackled through, panicked but steady. I've got 2 on the rooftops. Gunfire rattled overhead. The school's broken windows became teeth, spitting muzzle flashes from both directions. Her heart hammered. This wasn't a relay hub, it was a kill box. She pulled the girl tighter to her chest and hissed, "Stay down. No matter what you hear, stay down." Then she turned, rifle snapping to her shoulder. The first shadow darted across the courtyard, muzzle flashing. She squeezed the trigger, one shot clean. The figure dropped, disappearing behind the rubble. But for every one she cut down, more voices echoed through the ruins. Boots thundered against stone. Orders barked in a language that carried through the mountains like broken glass. The team was outnumbered, and she knew it. Cole's voice roared again, close now. "We're pinned, we need cover." Her mind raced. The girl, the team, the mission, the vow she had whispered long ago, the vow that burned brighter than the enemy's fire. No matter what, protect them. Her father's words echoed too, softer, buried under the storm. Strength doesn't roar, it whispers. She shifted, positioning herself between the girl and the open doorway. She couldn't move her, not yet. Not while gunfire stitched the walls like angry claws. "Ramirez," she snapped, "smoke now." A hiss, then a billowing cloud spread across the courtyard. Shadows blurred, movements muffled. It gave them seconds. Seconds were gold. She grabbed the girl's arm. "Come on." The child resisted, fear locking her small body into stone. The soldier dropped her rifle to sling it, then scooped the girl into her arms. She was light, frighteningly so, as though hunger had already claimed half her strength. Bullets snapped through the smoke, missing by inches. She sprinted low, boots hammering broken tiles, weaving through shadows. Cole spotted her, eyes widening when he saw what she carried. "What the hell is that?" he shouted over the gunfire. "Not what, who," she shot back, teeth gritted. "She's coming with us." Cole swore, firing another burst. "You're out of your mind, we don't have room for this." But she didn't argue. There was no time, and there was no universe where she would leave this child behind. The girl clung to her neck, trembling but silent. The soldier could feel the tiny heartbeat against her chest, a fragile rhythm beneath the thunder of battle. The team regrouped inside a half-standing house, walls cracked, roof sagging, but it gave them seconds of cover. "East and north," Ramirez gasped, sliding in beside them. His helmet was scuffed, his cheeks smeared with blood. "They've got us surrounded." Cole's eyes cut to the girl again, fury burning. "This is why we're pinned, you're slowing us down." Her voice was steel. "We were already pinned, she's not the reason." Ramirez glanced between them, his breathing sharp. "We need to fall back, find higher ground." Cole growled, We won't make it with extra baggage. The girl flinched at his tone, burying her face deeper into the soldier's shoulder. That broke something in her. She stepped closer, her own fury simmering under the surface. "Say baggage again," she hissed, her voice low, dangerous. Cole's jaw clenched. For a moment the battle outside faded, their standoff burning hotter than the gunfire. But Ramirez's shout cut through. "They're moving in." Grenades clinked against stone outside. Her instincts screamed. She dropped, rolling over the girl as the blast shook the building. Dust rained, boards cracked, the walls groaned. Her ears rang, but she forced herself up, dragging the girl into the narrow crawl space beneath a collapsed beam. It wasn't much, but it shielded her from sight. "Stay here," she whispered, cupping the child's face. "Don't move until I come back. Do you understand?" The girl's eyes were glassy with fear, but she nodded. The soldier brushed her hair back gently, a gesture so uncharacteristic it startled even her. "I'll be back, I promise." Then she turned, rifle in hand again. The soldier and the protector fused into one. She burst from cover, cutting down two advancing figures before they even spotted her. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, grounding her in the chaos. Cole and Ramirez opened fire alongside her, their fury unleashed in disciplined bursts. For a moment, they pushed back the tide, forcing the enemy into cover. But it was only a moment. The radio crackled static, then the commander's voice. "Alpha Team, report." Cole snatched the mic. "We're compromised, ambush in the village. Multiple hostiles, we need extraction." Static answered. The mountains swallowed their signal whole. "No good," Ramirez shouted. "Too much interference." She gritted her teeth. Alone again. The fight raged on. Shadows moved in the smoke, muzzles flashing like lightning in a storm. The air stank of gunpowder and blood. Every second stretched thin, fragile as glass. And then silence. Not complete, not lasting, but the brief lull between reloads, between waves. Her chest heaved. Sweat stung her eyes. Her arms ached from the weight of her rifle, the weight of the vow. She looked toward the crawl space. The girl's wide eyes peered back, shimmering with trust she hadn't asked for but couldn't reject. Cole followed her gaze, his expression torn, anger, disbelief, something else buried deep. "You're going to get us all killed for her," he spat. She met his eyes, voice calm but unyielding. "No, I'm going to keep us alive and her too. That's the difference." Ramirez's hand trembled as he reloaded. He looked between them, his young face etched with fear and admiration. "She's right," he whispered. Cole cursed under his breath but didn't argue again. Because deep down he knew she wasn't going to bend. Not for orders, not for survival, not even for him. The lull broke, gunfire roared again. And in that storm she moved like a shadow of her father, a whisper of strength, not roaring but steady, unyielding. Each shot was a vow renewed. Each step was a promise kept. The child would not die here, not while she still drew breath. Why did the smoke feel heavier than air? Every breath burned. Every exhale vanished into the haze that filled the broken village. The stench of gunpowder, charred wood, and blood mingled into something thick enough to choke. She coughed once, her chest searing, then pulled the child tighter against her. The girl's hair smelled of dust, of fear, too fragile for this place, too human for the storm that raged around them. "Move!" Cole's voice roared over the gunfire. They sprinted through the ruins, boots pounding, rifles clutched tight. Shadows flitted behind shattered walls. Bullets sparked against stone. The village was no longer a place. It was a labyrinth of fire and death, a trap that shrank with every step. She darted across an alley, pressing her back to the wall, scanning corners with sharp, steady eyes. Ramirez slid in beside her, gasping, sweat streaming down his dirt-streaked face. His rifle shook in his hands, but his eyes never left hers. "Where now?" he panted. She tilted her head upward, past the rooftops, toward the jagged silhouette of the ridge beyond. The high ground. If they could make it there, they'd have a chance, not much, but a chance. That way, she said, her voice low, controlled. Cole heard, grimacing as he reloaded. That's open ground. They'll cut us down before we're halfway. We don't have a choice, she replied. Her tone carried no hesitation. Stay here and we're dead. The silence after her words lasted only a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, they all knew she was right. The child stirred in her arms, whispering something in a language she didn't understand. The soldier pressed her close, whispering back, quiet, just a little longer. Cole caught her glance, shaking his head. You're insane, carrying her while we're trying to break out. You won't make it 10 steps. Her jaw clenched. She didn't answer with words. She adjusted the girl in her arms, gripped her rifle tighter with her free hand, and broke cover first. The night erupted. Muzzle flashes tore through the smoke. Bullets hissed like wasps, snapping past her ears, sparking against stone. She zigzagged through the rubble, boots scraping, lungs burning. Behind her, Ramirez and Cole laid down suppressive fire, their bursts carving brief paths of survival. Go, go, Ramirez shouted, his voice cracking. She leapt over a fallen beam, the child's weight pulling against her shoulder. Her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. Every step was a promise. Every breath was a refusal to fail. The ridge loomed closer, jagged against the horizon. But the ground between them and safety was a killing field, open dirt, no cover. Her chest tightened. This was where men died. Cole skidded up beside her, his face streaked with soot. We wait for a break, then sprint, on my signal. No, she said flatly. His eyes narrowed. No. She turned, scanning the rooftops through her scope. Her finger hovered near the trigger, breath slowing. We don't wait for a break, we make one. Her father's voice whispered through memory, steady and calm. Sometimes courage isn't stepping forward. It's dragging others with you when they're too scared to move. She sighted a rooftop figure, a silhouette against the haze. She fired. The man crumpled, falling hard. Another darted for cover. She tracked, squeezed. Another shot, clean. Now she hissed. Cole didn't argue this time. They bolted together, the three of them weaving across the open ground, the child's head buried in her chest. Bullets chased them, snapping dirt into their eyes, tearing lines in the earth at their heels. Her legs screamed, every muscle ablaze. The ridge drew closer, too slow, too far, her breath hitched. Then Ramirez stumbled. A cry ripped from his throat as his knee buckled, his body collapsing mid-sprint. She skidded, dirt spraying. Ramirez. Cole cursed, firing wildly to keep the enemy's heads down. Leave him. The words sliced through her. No. She dropped to her knees, shifting the girl onto her back, her arms around Ramirez in one motion. His face twisted in pain, blood soaking through his pant leg. I can't, he gasped. Yes, you can, she snapped. Stand. Her voice was steel, leaving no room for refusal. He groaned, leaning into her. Together they stumbled forward, her body straining under the weight of him and the girl. Every step was agony, but stopping was death. Cole's voice roared over the chaos, almost there. The ridge loomed, closer now. Shadows scrambled above, enemy figures moving to cut them off. Her chest heaved, her vision tunneled. And then salvation. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, but it wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed past them into the village. The cracks were sharper, the rhythm familiar, friendly fire. Eagle Team, a voice bellowed through comms, breaking the static. We've got eyes on you, move, move. Her legs nearly buckled with relief. They stumbled the last meters, collapsing behind rocks as Allied rifles thundered overhead. Ramirez groaned, clutching his leg. Cole collapsed onto his back, gasping. The girl pressed into the soldier's chest, trembling but alive. For a moment, there was only the sound of breathing, ragged, desperate, alive. Then Cole sat up, glaring at her. You should have left him. She met his eyes, fury simmering beneath calm. "And you should have carried him when he fell, but you didn't." "I did." The silence cut sharper than the gunfire. Ramirez looked away, ashamed of his weakness but grateful beyond words. The child's small hand clutched at the soldier's vest, grounding her. Cole finally muttered, "You're going to break us all." Her voice softened, quiet but unshakable. "No, I'm going to keep us human." The words lingered like smoke in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. Above them, friendly fire kept the enemy at bay. Below, the village burned, its twisted shadows devouring themselves. The mission had failed, the convoy destroyed, the intel gone, the cost written in blood. But in her arms, a child breathed. In her shadow, Ramirez lived. And in her silence, her father's voice whispered again, not loud but eternal. Sometimes courage didn't roar. Sometimes it just refused to let go. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The hum of the helicopter blades still lingered in her ears, but here, inside the debriefing room, the weight was unbearable. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A steel table stretched between her and two officers in pressed uniforms, their eyes sharp, their questions sharper. The girl sat outside, guarded, fed, her small frame dwarfed by a blanket draped over her shoulders. Ramirez kept packing the hallway, stealing glances through the glass as though making sure she hadn't vanished. Cole stood against the far wall, arms crossed, jaw tight, radiating disapproval. The officers flipped through the mission report, pages marked with red annotations. "Operation compromised," one said flatly, not looking up. "Convoy lost, targets scattered, casualties avoided only by backup intervention." Her throat was dry, she didn't answer. The other officer's gaze finally lifted, settling on her like a spotlight. "Explain why you jeopardized the mission by extracting a civilian." The words landed heavy. Civilian. As though the girl were a file to be tagged, not a life to be carried. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't a threat, she was in the line of fire, I couldn't leave her there. The officer scribbled something, his expression never shifted. That wasn't the objective. Her voice hardened, though it never rose. Objectives change when reality does. Cole's scoff cut the air. Reality was we were outnumbered. We should have focused on survival, not hauling dead weight. Ramirez stopped packing, spinning toward him. "She's not dead weight. If she hadn't grabbed me out there, he faltered, his voice cracking. Shame burned across his face. He looked down. "I wouldn't be here." Cole's eyes narrowed. "And if she hadn't been carrying that girl, maybe she'd have had two hands free to cover you in the first place." The tension stretched, razor sharp. One officer raised his hand. "Enough. The mission is over. Debrief will continue tomorrow. Until then, all of you are on restricted movement, dismissed." Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving her standing in the empty room, her reflection fractured in the glass pane. She pressed her palms against the cool surface, staring at her own face. Dirt-streaked, eyes hollow, a shadow of who she used to be. Her father's voice stirred again, distant, almost lost. "Sometimes courage isn't about orders. It's about conscience." But conscience came with a cost. And right now, the cost was written across Cole's glare and the quiet disappointment of command. Hours later in the barracks, the quiet stretched like a wound that wouldn't close. Cole sat sharpening his knife, each scrape deliberate. Ramirez leaned against his bunk, staring at the floor. She sat alone, the girl curled beside her on the cot, already asleep. The child's breathing was soft, steady, fragile, proof that she hadn't failed. Cole's voice finally cut through the silence. "You think you did the right thing, but you didn't. You gambled all our lives on one." Her eyes stayed on the child. "One is enough." He let out a bitter laugh. "That's not how this works. You save one, you lose 20. That's the math, that's war." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel under it. "Math doesn't bury you at night. Faces do." The scrape of his knife stopped. His jaw tightened, he didn't answer. Ramirez shifted, uncomfortable. His voice was quiet, uncertain. What if she's the reason? You know, the reason we're even supposed to be here. What if she knows something? Cole snapped his head toward him. She's a kid. She doesn't know anything. But Ramirez pressed, his eyes flicking to her. Then why was she there? In the middle of that, why didn't they clear her out before setting up the ambush? The thought silenced the room. She finally turned, meeting Ramirez's gaze. The same question had haunted her since she'd carried the girl from the ruins. Why was she there? Her chest tightened. She didn't have the answer, not yet. Later, when the others had drifted into restless half-sleep, she lay awake. The barracks hummed faintly with generators. Somewhere down the hall, a radio played low static. The girl stirred beside her, murmuring in dreams. She brushed the child's hair gently, almost instinctively. Her hands, so used to the cold weight of a rifle, felt clumsy in tenderness. She closed her eyes and her father's memory came alive. Not in battle this time, but in the small kitchen of their old home. His hands stained with oil, his voice tired but gentle. People think courage is the roar of a crowd, the charge into fire, but it is. It's quieter than that. It's the moments no one sees, the ones where no one will ever thank you. That's when you find out who you really are. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. Who am I then? The answer didn't come. The door creaked. She looked up. Cole slipped out of his bunk, his movements stiff. He thought she hadn't noticed, but she did. He left the barracks, boots echoing down the hall. Curiosity burned. She hesitated, then gently eased the girl's hand from her arm, laying her back down. Quietly, she followed. Cole moved into the corridor, then out to the courtyard. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of jet fuel and dust. He leaned against the fence, shoulders hunched, staring at nothing. For the first time she saw it, not anger, not judgment, but weight. His face wasn't carved of stone, it was carved of regret. You shouldn't be out here, he muttered without turning. Neither should you, she replied softly. He exhaled, slow and heavy. You think I don't care, that I don't see the girl as human. That's not true. She stayed silent, letting him speak. My first deployment, he said quietly, we cleared a house. Thought it was empty. It was. Family inside, kids. One ran toward me. I hesitated just a second. That's all it took. Enemy got the drop on us. My buddy didn't make it. Since then I don't hesitate. I can't. His hands trembled, almost imperceptibly. She stepped closer, her voice low. That's not the same as leaving her. His jaw tightened. It feels the same. The silence between them stretched, thick with things unsaid. Finally, she whispered, we're all carrying ghosts, Cole, but don't mistake carrying them for being one of them. He turned, meeting her eyes for the first time without anger, just weariness. The moment hung there, fragile as glass. Then footsteps echoed behind them. Ramirez, wide-eyed, breathless. Command wants us, now. They exchanged a glance. No words, just the weight of what awaited them. Back in the debriefing room, the officers laid out new photos, new intel. The convoy hadn't been the objective. The ambush hadn't been random. The girl had been the bait. She didn't hear the explosion, not fully, only the silence that followed, that awful, ringing silence. The convoy was gone. What remained was smoke, fire in the distance, a taste of iron in the air, and her heart pounding so hard it almost cracked through her ribs. She should have run forward, should have screamed, should have thrown herself into the wreckage, but she didn't. She stood still, frozen for a moment that felt endless, and in that stillness she heard something else, something faint, a voice. Not loud, weak, somewhere inside the shattered metal, someone was alive. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She sprinted, coughing through black smoke, burning her throat, shards of glass under her boots. She pulled at doors, ripped at twisted steel. Her gloves tore, her arms bled. But she didn't care. She wasn't leaving them here, not like this. One man's eyes found hers through the wreckage, wide, terrified. She pressed her hand against the steel to steady him, whispering, "Hold on, just hold on." Her voice wasn't loud, but it reached him, and it gave him something to fight for, even in the middle of hell. Hours blurred together. The medevac arrived. The flames turned to smoke, and she watched them lift the wounded away. She had saved one, maybe two, but not all, never all. And that truth cut deeper than any shrapnel. Later, when the camp grew quiet, she sat alone, back against cold stone, knees pulled tight, and finally she let it out. Not in sobs, not in screams, just a single tear carving down her ash-streaked face. She whispered to herself, "This is the cost." But then she rose, brushed the ash from her uniform, and walked into the night where no one could see her, trembling. Because tomorrow they would need her voice again, not loud but steady. And sometimes that's enough. The mission would never end, the ghosts would never leave, but she carried them. She carried all of them, and with every step she made a promise. Not to win, not to survive, but to stand, even if it meant standing alone. And so on the battlefield, where courage was often shouted, where orders were barked, and fear roared through every heart, her presence remained. A whisper against the noise, an echo that lived on in every life she touched. And when the final chapter of her story was written, it didn't speak of medals, or victories, or even survival. It said only this: sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And her presence, quiet, steady, unyielding, echoed across the battlefield as living courage.